from my side. This is just to mention that we are starting in about 1 or 2 minutes. We are just waiting that the people who are queuing up are in the meeting. We will start in 2 minutes from now. A very good afternoon to everybody. A very warm welcome. Just a short notice that we're still waiting that everybody comes in, and we will start in a second with the web talk. Yeah, then this will be now the official very warm welcome to all of you at the screens. I would like to welcome you to our web talk today on electric mobility and climate goals in China. It's a great pleasure and honor for us that you join us today. And I'm very much looking forward to my talk today with Hui He from the ICCT. Hui He is the China Program Director of the International Council for Clean Transportation. She is currently based in San Francisco, but she is commuting, so to say, at least in times of no COVID, between Beijing and San Francisco, working in China for more than 10 years, is affiliated with the International Council on Clean Transportation for more than 10 years now. She was born in Beijing, studied in Beijing at Beijing University, Economics and International Relations, and has a master degree from the University of Texas on Business Administration. And it's a great pleasure and honor to talk to her today. My name is Christian Hochfeld. I'm the Executive Director of Agora Verkehrswende, a Berlin-based think tank on decarbonization of the transport sector, mainly focusing on Germany. So it's a little bit a special event also for us to focus on international issues. But I think it will be clear within this meeting why we focus on this issue, why we focus on the development of electric mobility in China in this web talk, the past, the status quo, and the perspectives, because it's important also for the development here in Germany, but it's also very important for the global climate change and climate protection agenda in the transport sector. That is why, we really like to have this discussion for today. It will go for 70 minutes or 75 minutes, 1 hour and a quarter. Maybe before we start, a few technical advices. We are very much looking also forward to questions from your side or comments. Please put the question or comments you have in the Q&A session and under the Q&A sign in the Zoom app. And we will try to cover as many questions as possible. I cannot promise that we cover all of them, but hopefully we will be able to cover some of them also in the discussion that we have. Secondly, I just would like to mention that we would like to record this session, and because we learned from a couple of people that they are unable to attend this meeting today, but would like to see it afterwards. So we are recording this and we will publish it in the YouTube channel of Agora Verkehrswende. Having said this, I think without further ado, I would like to introduce a little bit of the reason why we're focusing on this issue today. I mentioned already, China is on the one hand, the biggest CO2 polluter and climate polluter in the world globally. On the other hand, it's already, since a couple of years, the worldwide biggest automotive market with, I think last year, about 25 million registrations per year. That means, in comparison, half of the German fleet registered here in stock will be newly sold and newly registered in China every year. And China was definitely the country a couple of years ago which was driving the structural change and the change from combustion engine to electrification and the market uptake of the electrification worldwide, because it's also one of the biggest markets for German automakers and car makers. Nearly every fourth car built by German automakers last year were sold to Chinese customers. So in this sense, I think it lays the floor for our discussion today, showing the importance of China driving the climate change agenda and the climate protection agenda in the future, driving the change and the structural change in automotive market, and showing what needs to be done for Germany to stay competitive as a competitive country and a competitive automotive production site. That is the reason why we focus on this issue. And it's a great pleasure to do this together with an absolute expert on this, with Hui He, as I mentioned, the China Program Director of the ICCT. Hui and I, we know each other for quite some time. We met the first time when I started my work in Beijing for the GIZ, the Deutsche Gesellschaft für internationale Zusammenarbeit, in 2010. Only months since I started there, we had a meeting in the Ministry of Industry and Information Technology, and the main issue was how to promote electric vehicles in China. This development was mainly driven by Wangang. This is also a bridge between Germany and China. Wangang was studied here in Germany, was working with a German car maker before he became the dean of the automotive department in the University of Shanghai. And afterwards, he became the Minister for Science and Technology. And that was the starting of electrification of road transport in China, 28, 29. And since then, a lot has happened in the past and in China with regard to electrification. And in the first half of our web talk, we will focus on what happened since then. Where are we at the moment with electrification? Before, in the second part of this session, we will focus on the question, what are the perspectives of electric mobility and climate protection and road transport in China? So without further ado, I'm looking forward to your presentation, Hui, and the floor is yours. And thank you very much for accepting this invitation of us, for joining us today and having this seminar together. Please, the floor is yours.
Sure. Thank you so much, Christian, for the kind introduction of me and the ICCT, and especially you still remember things happened more than 10 years ago. That's really great. So maybe let me first give some quick introduction of how the ICCT works. So the ICCT is a nonprofit research organization focusing on clean transportation policies. A little different from many other like advocacy NGOs, we work more like a think tanker or a consultant directly to the government, to the direct policymakers around the world who made vehicle or other mobile source related policies. So for China, we began to work in China, I think back in 2006, right after the ICCT just established. And I joined the ICCT in 2007, so I witnessed the entire history of the ICCT working in China. Again, we start our work by making connections with the government, the direct policymakers. Here, just to mention a few, the Ministry of Industry and Information Technology, as Christian has already said, they are responsible for developing vehicle efficiency and other safety and other policies for motor vehicles. And also we work primarily now with the Ministry of Ecology and Environment, MEE, and there are quasi-government institutions that support them technically in developing the standards. So we go to these policymakers, ask what are your issues, and then we bring in international best practices, and also using our own in-house capacity to tailor the technical support for them, crunching a lot of the data to provide the technical evidence of feasibility, cost, and other social justification of the standards. So at the beginning, we were working pretty remotely, so I have to commute to travel a lot between the US and China to do the work. But after 2015, we established our local office. And today, by the requirement of the Chinese government, our local representative office is now hosted or supervised directly under the Ministry of Environment. So that even connects us more closely with the decision makers there in China. Today, our China office has about 10 staff members, and together globally, we have over 100 employees. So with that, I will dive into our talk today. So my topic today is the development of electric vehicles in China in the past decade, and also implications for the future. According to the guidance provided by Christian, obviously my presentation will cover two parts. One is that we will really take a retrospective look into the history and learn from the past, how we get here. And then in the second part, based on that experience and also the international dynamics, where are we heading to provide some future perspectives? So let's first learn from the history. I try to make sure that you can review my slides well. Okay?
It's okay.
Great. So first, let me quickly show some stats. As of 2020, actually our data only goes to August 2020, China maintains as the world's largest national EV market. In fact, the nation just hit a very important milestone in deploying electric vehicles by putting 5 million EVs on the road. It was actually a goal set by the government back in 2012. Here, I'm only showing the sales of passenger cars up to August. But now we also get the full 2020 annual data. In the last year, China actually sold more than 1.2 million electric vehicles, but that includes both passenger and also commercial vehicles. This happened amid all the economic downturn and the impact of COVID. So it was a really exciting number. Of course, from this figure, you can also see that Europe has actually evidenced tremendous growth in its EV market in that period as well. So on this chart, I'm telling a similar story, but from a slightly different perspective. So now we're looking at the market penetration of electric vehicles. Again, this chart only shows the number for passenger cars. Overall, the global average EV penetration in the last year was 3.5%. And compare with the previous year, 2019, with a little less than 3%, the additional half percentage point was mainly contributed or driven by a few major European markets. Here I'm showing United Kingdom, Germany, France, as well as by China. So the full year 2020 China data was 6.5%. Actually, in the first 3 quarters, there is a major downturn in the market, but in the last quarter, the China's EV market has sped up and catch up to speed. So now let's take a look at the supply chain and especially battery production. So this chart shows that the total battery capacity in a historical trend in gigawatts. Here we're using different colors to imply the country, origin country of the battery production. So basically red for China, green for Japan, and yellow for South Korea. So here you can see as of 2019, the Chinese companies actually produced more than 1/3 of the global EV batteries. And globally, the 4 major suppliers, Panasonic, CATL, CATL, LG, and BYD actually represented nearly 80% of the total battery production. Infrastructure, a very important element. We were very pleased to see that the public chargers were growing side by side to electric vehicles in the past few years. And especially in the last 3 years or so, there was a very rapid growth of the number of public chargers. And this is demonstrated on the figure to the left. Here are the absolute number of public chargers installed. Again, China perhaps adopted more than half of the total public chargers worldwide. On the right-hand side, we're showing the density of the public chargers using 2 metrics. One is shown on the left axis, which is a charger per million population. This is demonstrated by the bars, and the different color of the bars imply the different technologies. Here we have level 2 chargers as well as DC fast charger. On the right-hand side, we're demonstrating another metric, which is electric vehicle per charger, or EV to charger ratio. So here we're seeing that China's ratio is 8:1. Again, this refers to public charger. If we are considering also private residential chargers, etc., the ratio will go down to about 3 or 4:1. So China is much lower than places like the United States, but basically compares with a few major European countries. However, the ratio doesn't really tell everything, right? Because the efficacy of charging infrastructure system basically depends on the urban layout as well as like where the chargers are installed and how effectively they're being used. So let's quickly take a look at the top companies, top manufacturers. Here we listed 13 auto manufacturers that have reached large scale of economy in producing electric vehicles. To define large scale, we use a threshold of 200,000 cumulative sales globally. So clearly we can see that Tesla is really standing out in the first position with over 900,000 cumulative sales at the end of 2019 globally. And following Tesla, there was a BYD, pretty close at more than 750,000 global sales. And these two big guys actually led the rest of the companies or the auto groups by a substantial margin. So on this list of 13, the Chinese companies take 4 positions, and these are BYD, BAIC, SAIC, and Geely. It's an interesting observation that 2 of the largest manufacturers, Tesla and SAIC, were both located in Shanghai. So the city is now being very aggressive in pushing for electric mobility. And earlier this year, the city even set a very ambitious target to have half of its private car fleet to be electric by 2025 in next 5 years. The last but not the least indicator are the cities. So the ICCT has been tracking the top EV development cities around the world or metropolitans. By leading city, we really look at both the number of electric vehicles put on road, as well as the market penetration of EVs. So both parameters are shown on this chart on the left and right axis. So about 25 of such leading cities or metropolitan cities were selling more than 40% of the global EV sales in the last year. And among this list, 14 cities were from China. We also observed that in the past few years, the number of Chinese cities on this list was actually growing. When we just began to track the world EV capitals, we only see like mega cities like Shanghai, Shenzhen, Beijing, Hangzhou on this list. But today we're seeing more Chinese cities and more like not mega cities, but less wealthy and smaller cities like Liuzhou on this list, also Qingdao and Weifang. So these smaller cities may actually offer some useful experiences to the rest of the world. So now we turn to look at the policies, sort of what have China done to bring us here. China actually adopted a number of different type of policies like strategies, plans, and regulations to drive its EV growth in the past. So this figure illustrates the relation of the different type of policies. On the top, the blue triangle, we see the national macro level strategies and plans, and these mainly refer to the macroeconomic and social economic planning that China does for every 5 years. And this is called the 5-year plan in China. So these plans actually drive all the policies below that. For example, the entire EV strategy in China was formed, or actually was birthed from China's 10th 5-year plan in early 2000. And especially from the 863, the National Key Technology Project emerged in that 5-year. So below the macro level national plans are the sectoral or industrial plans and goals, and sometimes also fleet specific targets and goals. Just to name a few examples, in 2012, China set an important goal of putting 5 million EVs on the road by 2020. As spoken earlier, this goal has already been met. And the most recent national target was the New Energy Vehicle Development Plan 2021 to 2035. So that plan aims at 20% EV market by 2025. We also know that China is being very successful in promoting electric buses. And the requirement to electrify the entire bus fleet was set by the Ministry of Transportation. So this is another example of the plan at this level. So below the sectoral or industrial plans and goals, there are a range of national, central, and local policies, and that includes fiscal policies as well as regulatory mandates. So let's try to dive into each of these, but only briefly, given the time concern. So here I'm showing all the EV targets set in those strategies, plans, or regulatory requirements. But this chart does not show only the officially announced plan, the targets or standards. It also shows things like the statement made by a top leader or goals proposed from major research projects. For example, on the right-hand side, you see this 50% EV target by 2035. This was actually from a major research project called New Energy Vehicle Development Roadmap 2.0. There was a 1.0, but the most recent update was 2.0. This was led by SAE China and a number of industry associations and OEMs, but this was not deemed as an official target. The same goal was actually also mentioned by a top leader in a major event 2 years ago. The real official target was the one was 20% by 2025. It was specified in the NEV development plan set by the Chinese State Council. At the bottom, you also see the two blue boxes. So these refer to the New Energy Vehicle Mandate Policy, or also called as dual credit policy, more popular in China. So these basically require the auto manufacturers to generate a certain percentage of EV credits by a given year, and therefore to require a certain number of electric vehicle production. This type of policy is modeled after California's landmark zero-emission vehicle program, and currently they only apply to light-duty vehicles, and there are 2 stages. In the second stage, the estimated EV market penetration goal driven by this policy would be around 8 to 10% by the end of 2023. China is also considering a similar program for commercial vehicles. Here I show as the purple box. Next, I'm going to talk about a pillar policy that dominates the past decade in China, the Central Subsidy Program. You probably have heard a lot about this program, but what I want to highlight here is the design of the program was really to promote certain technologies, sort of speak the longer range, higher energy density, and more efficient EVs. Table on the left shows all the technical parameters that determine the size of the subsidy by vehicle categories. Here you see passenger cars, bus and coach, truck and vocational vehicles, and also by different years. Let me give you an example using the 2019 battery electric passenger car subsidy. So the size of the subsidy was collectively determined by the battery capacity in kilowatt hour, the electric range, battery energy density, and also the electric consumption or electric efficiency of the vehicle. And the exact formula was shown on the right top. At the figure below, I'm trying to show you the impacts of such a policy design. So basically driven by the overly tightened requirement on battery energy density, we can see in the past few years, the higher density type of battery, the NMC type of battery, were growing very fast and sort of dominant the market right now. And this is in contrast to like the early years when LFP type of batteries were dominating. Next, let's take a quick look at the city level policies. I'm kind of skipping the provincial or state level policies because the China EV development was really beginning from these city pilots. So cities played a major role. That being said, it doesn't mean that provinces are not doing anything. I'll give you an example later about the Hainan province. But here, this is a study we did a few years ago. The information might be a little outdated, but still I want to show you the basics. So here we cataloged a number of different policies to promote EVs at the city level, basically into three main categories: direct fiscal incentives, indirect incentives, and other incentives like the fleet programs or R&D investment, etc. So we can see the majority of the policies were still like fiscal or financial policies. And here we also account how many cities were adopting these policies. So the most popular ones are the subsidies or vehicle tax break. But we also see other type of fiscal policies. For example, the reduction of charging fee, the road toll fee, and car insurance fee, parking fee, etc. I also want to highlight that a number of cities also deployed the non-direct incentives, primarily the license plate incentives for EVs and also the road access privileges given to EVs. In our analysis, actually, these indirect policies play a greater role in appealing consumers to buy and use EVs. I'm going to show you in a second. So we didn't just catalog these policies, we also quantified their monetary value to consumers. So this chart, in this chart, the length of the bars basically imply how much monetary value does each policy value to consumers. So it's pretty striking to see that the yellow bar representing the license plate incentive of EVs play a much bigger role than the direct incentives denoted by the blue bar and other colors. They play extremely well in large cities like Beijing, Shanghai, and Shenzhen that already adopted a total vehicle quota to solve their urban problems like congestion. This is to say that, for example, it is more appealing for a potential car buyer to consider EV because it will save them a lot of money with a free license plate. If you buy traditional ICE vehicles, you probably pay more than the value of your own vehicle to get the license plate and to be able to drive on the road. Okay, that ends my first part, and I'll pause here for questions and reflections.
Thank you very much, Hui. That was really, I think, a high density, not only high density energy battery, but the high density presentation on what is the status of electric mobility in China at the moment. And before we turn into, the perspectives, just a couple of questions, which I think also play a major role currently. when we look a little bit back on the question when things started, from your perspective, what were the main drivers for China to go into electric vehicles when they started to think about it? It was not climate change, I assume, but what were the main drivers who forced China, or were the reason why China really was focusing on electric vehicles?
Right. That's a very good question. So more than like 15 years ago, during the 10th and 11th five-year plan, it was actually to promote China's auto industry back in that time. That's the main driver of having an electric vehicle strategy. And the background, probably many of you have already learned to some extent that since the 1980s, China just began to open its market after a major reform launched by Deng Xiaoping. So China has been collaborating a lot with the global manufacturers in trying to develop its own very nascent auto industry. But basically by forming these joint venture companies, the Chinese government tries to learn quickly of the global technologies, so to develop its own. But this strategy wasn't very successful, and it was proved by the full decade of how the auto industry developed in China. So into 2000, driven mainly by a few like leaders, including Van Gang, China was beginning to take a look at where we can take advantage without getting into the very sophisticated ICE engine and motor and all that technologies China wasn't very good at. So China was looking at one thing they did pretty well at that stage, which is battery production. And in early 2000, actually starting from early 2000, China began to be a major producer of batteries of other products, appliance and other products. So based on that knowledge of building batteries, China began to think about maybe we can leverage this capacity and build electric vehicles. So that's basically the beginning of the story. But as we all know, as time passed by, the story has evolved. And now China is using electric vehicle strategies trying to solve multiple social economic problems.
Thank you. Is it, or you mentioned that, one of the main drivers was industrial policy. On the other hand, also, you showed that the main fleets which were established over the last 10 years are based in only a couple of cities. So definitely also air pollution and the sincere air pollution in China was the main driver for also promoting electric vehicles in road transport in urban cities, I assume.
Exactly. In the past few years, especially, China has launched a few major programs in solving its severe air pollution issues. And that actually inspired many mega cities in my top city list, for example, Beijing and Shanghai, to use electric vehicles as a way to clean up its air. And one special example might be Shenzhen. Shenzhen didn't have very severe air quality issue, but they realized they want to be the world class. They want to achieve really the world class air quality, matching the WHO recommended level. So they were going very aggressive in pushing for electrification. But also that combines with the fact that a major auto manufacturer was based in the city. So anyways, more and more cities are leveraging electric mobility to solve their air quality problem. And even looking into the future, a few cities have already raised the concept of reducing carbon emissions or peaking the carbon emissions, leveraging on the electric mobility strategy.
before we go to the perspectives, you also mentioned buses. And when we talked to prepare this webinar, I asked you, Hui, can you also show us some data on buses? And your answer was, I can talk about the buses, Christian, but I don't have any data because we don't have anything to do there. It comes on its own. And can you give us also the insight a little bit on what is the situation if we talk on the electrification of buses? Because electrification of public transport is a very important issue in Europe, especially now also in Germany, trying to electrify the fleet in the next, let's say, decade or 15 years. And what is the status in China on the electrification of the public transport as mainly buses?
Sure. I should have touched base on buses. In terms of data, as far as I know, in 2019, nearly 98% of the new fleets were already electric or new energy. And in terms of the vehicle population or stock, I think already more than half of the current stock were already in some form of new energy. So that's the quick update on data. When I say it comes on its own, it doesn't really mean it because it happened so fast. It happened, the fleet turnover was happening in the past 2-3 years. And China's MOT set a goal, like by the end of 2022, all the major cities or all the polluting cities have to turn all their bus fleet into electric 100%. And the rest of the nation will follow that. I think the full electric time for buses will be in between 2022 and 2023. So basically it's happening too fast for any agency to intervene. But this does not happen automatically. This is actually a key requirement in the environmental policy or environmental program I just mentioned. This comes from China's a major air quality plan called 10 Principles for Air Quality, launched in 2013. And the first phase was that 5-year, 2013 to 2017. And there was a second phase called the Blue Sky Defense Plan. So both phases required quick shift of public service fleet, including buses, and in some circumstances also urban logistics fleet and other like service fleet like postal trucks and sanitation trucks, things like that, to be electric in a very short time frame. So that was from there.
With regard to industrial policies, you mentioned that at the very beginning and also within the last decade, China had a lot of or made a lot of efforts to protect the local companies and to protect the Chinese market, formed joint ventures, asked for intellectual property rights to hand over by international producer to local local companies. Didn't export any cars to other countries. My feeling is that this changed a little bit, that they are now more open to bring companies to China to produce electric vehicles, not in a joint venture. I think Tesla is the most famous example now with this site in Shanghai, and seeing themselves as a hub for the production of electric vehicles and also exporting more and more vehicles to the world. Do you see this similar, or do you have a different observation here with regard to the industrial strategy?
I think you are very correct. But let's take a look into the history again. At the beginning of the EV strategy or program, China really aims at only promoting its own auto industry. And for a number of years after the first launch of the pilot program in 2009, the 10-city, 1,000 vehicle project, you can see only the Chinese manufacturers are qualified for receiving the subsidies or R&D investment from the government and all kinds of other incentives. But this has changed after 2018. So from the top of China's leadership, they decide, oh, now it's ready to test how strong our industry, our EV industry is. And let's invite some friends or to compete. So in 2018, there's a key milestone document or policy, which is to relieve the very strict requirement of forming a joint venture auto manufacturer in China. Without getting into the detail, it basically means it's easier for a foreign auto company to establish an EV plant in China and to form collaboration with the Chinese companies. And after that, we see Tesla has launched in Shanghai. And today, when you look at Shanghai's policy, they're really seeing themselves as a key auto industry base, and not just for auto industry, for the new generation of auto industry, for the EV industry, owning Tesla and SAIC. I think they are really shooting for high, very ambitious mid and long-term goals of electrification because they have the confidence they now have a strong local EV industry capacity.
Thank you. I think it's time now to go to the second part. And I think there are two things which will guide us through this. The first thing is, as you mentioned, we are seeing that, as I mentioned, China was also, in the market in China was one of the main reasons driving the German automotive industry, the European automotive industry, the American automotive industry to also go to electrification because they think or they thought we cannot leave this market to others and we have to stay in the Chinese market. Now, as you mentioned, if we look to California, if we look to Europe, we even see higher shares in electrification in other parts of the world. And people are wondering, is China slowing down in the, change and the structural change and the promotion of electrification? And the second thing I think is even more important, that we see the game changer only by end of last year, that President Xi introduced and mentioned the climate pledges that China is striving for carbon neutrality before 2060, and even more important maybe for transport, to peak the China's CO2 emission and greenhouse gas emissions in China before 2030. And given the fact that at the same time, China also would like to become an industrialized country with higher GDP by the mid of the century, and the fleet might grow from 200 million cars on Chinese roads at the moment to 500 million cars at the mid of the century, there is a huge challenge now for China to bring down also the emissions in the transport sector. And I think the recent plans, the 14th five-year plan, which has been published only a couple of months ago, maybe don't really reflect what's now the challenge. And but maybe you can give us some perspective what those pledges will mean to the road transport sector and especially the strategy of electrification to China, or for China, sorry. Thank you, Hui.
Okay, I'll try my best to cover these points. Okay, so my implications or perspectives for the future also actually cover two major points or two major questions. The first one being what kind of role China can play in the future global EV markets or in the global transition to electric mobility. That's number one. And number two being what role that electrification can play in meeting China's own pledges or environmental pledges, as you asked as well, Christian. So again, the ICCT style is always to use a lot of data to support what we say. So on the first point, it's an easier point. We offer these two quick insights. First, China will continue to serve as the powerhouse to the global industry. So this chart basically shows all the production plans announced by major suppliers, battery suppliers around the world. And we can see that the Chinese companies will serve at least 1/3 of the total battery production for EVs in the near term, in 2025. So certainly this is one role that China can play. The second role, we think China has an immense opportunity to expand EV shipments abroad, or basically raise its global acknowledgement of this brand in the next decade or so. So this chart basically plots how many vehicles produced in the EVs produced in a region are also sold in the same region. So when you see a bigger size of bubble, it basically means this market is primarily producing for its own domestic sales, and such as China. So here you see China is highly self-sufficient market. Here we're talking about light-duty vehicle, passenger cars only. Commercial vehicles are a totally different story. So if we look at passenger EVs, 99% of the cars produced were also sold domestically. And this is certainly not the strategy of many other global markets. An extreme opponent case would be Japan, this green dot. So basically, Japan's production was primarily for exporting. It's actually exporting 65% of its EV production to the rest of the world. And you can see the United States and Europe as a whole, are somewhere in between of these domestic versus global strategies. Again, if you want to export, that means your industry must be highly competitive globally. China hasn't been there so far, so this might be both an opportunity and a challenge for China. Let's take a look at the future ambition many people are highly interested in. So these are all the governmental announcements, or in some cases, more like a enforceable requirements in different markets of their future electrification process. So here we can see, driven by the long-term decarbonization goals or by local air pollution problems, many countries or regions, especially the European countries, are setting full electrification targets. Again, here we refer to passenger cars in the next few decades. We see the early actions from Norway, which is already more than halfway of going electric. So their full electrification targets is also the closest before 2025. But we also see these bigger markets like the UK, Canada, France, and also California of the United States set their full electrification targets in between 2030 and 2040. Here we also see Germany coming along by 2050. However, when we look at China, the only official announcement of targets that they made is this 20% by 2025 and nothing beyond that. So to partially answer your question, I think China's ambition for electrification has been due for a major upgrade, so to meet the country's long-term environmental commitment. So here I'm showing a similar concept, but at local level. So here are the pledges made by the world's cities. Here we use different colors to imply the country of origin of different cities, blue for Europe, green for Japan, purple for US cities, and red for Chinese cities. I won't get into the detail, but I'm happy to see that more and more Chinese subnational governments are making pledges for full electrification. For example, Hainan province, they released a clean energy vehicle roadmap till 2030. And in that, Hainan proposed to get to 100% electric for its private passenger car fleet by 2030. And then earlier I mentioned Shanghai. So here is Shanghai's official target to have 50% electric private cars by 2025, basically in the next 5 years. And here we also see Liuzhou as one of the EV capitals has promised 20% for 2025. Here's some more detail of Hainan's roadmap, and it doesn't only apply to light-duty vehicles, but it also apply to a number of commercial vehicle and heavy-duty vehicle categories. For example, the urban freight, sanitation trucks, tour coaches, etc. So when you see a green target, this means the target refers to new energy vehicle target. And when it shows in yellow, it means it's clean energy vehicle targets. And the difference being the inclusion of like a cleaner fuel, alternative fuel, and especially CNG. Okay, so trying to self-answer my second question. In one recent ICCT analysis, we think that electrification is one of the most important strategy or technical pathway to decarbonize China's transportation sector. So in this study, we assessed multiple strategies, including direct efficiency improvement or CO2 standards for motor vehicles and other mobile sources, electrification requirements, as well as emissions standards, which reduce the co-benefit climate pollutants like black carbon and other short-lived climate pollutants. And we also considered the freight modal shift strategies. So basically, as this chart shows, that the strategy that will deliver the highest potential in reducing carbon emissions in the long term is this green wedge, which represents electrification, but it includes the ramp up of electric vehicles as well as going to cleaner grid. Altogether, they deliver more than 1/3 of the total reduction potential in 2050. So now we're assessing actually a set of world-class, the best policies around the world. We're assuming that the Chinese leaders will consider a set of world-class measures to handle its own carbon peaking and carbon neutrality targets in the future. So what I mean is that, for example, electrification, it will go way beyond what China has promised, the 20% market penetration for now. It goes all the way to 100% electric between 2035 and 2045 for different vehicle segments or vehicle categories. Only with such ambitious electrification targets can China reduce carbon emissions by 80% in 2050, which is only getting close to President Xi's carbon neutrality pledge for 2060. Of course, you wouldn't expect transportation alone will achieve carbon neutrality. There are other measures in other segments, sectors as well. But electrification certainly is a very important thing to consider. So finally, I try to give some of my own reflections. In the first part, I revealed that China has cultivated the world's largest EV market and also became the largest battery supplier. This is benefiting from a wide range of strategies, plans, and central and local policies. Most importantly, looking into the future, we think China can play a greater role in the global EV market by expanding its technology and vehicle exports. And also, it is the time to consider 100% EV target for the long term. And to meet that target, China can consider a number of innovative policies suitable for its own condition that includes gradually tightened EV sales requirement, not just for cars, but also for trucks, and also to continue tighten the efficiency standards for motor vehicles. And it is also important to introduce enforceable CO2 standard in parallel for motor vehicles, because only by strong enforcement, one can expect these standards set on paper can be really materialized. Lastly, we recommend China to focus on electrifying its heavy-duty truck sector, because obviously this will bring tremendous co-benefits to China's local air quality challenge and also the climate change mitigation challenge. So we think from policy side, there is a good opportunity for China to introduce a direct EV sales mandate for the truck sector. And California has already taken that step. Again, I'll pause here and welcome your questions and your thoughts.
Thank you very much, Hui. That was, I think, impressive perspective, which shows that at least your clear position is that currently or in the near future, we will see tightening regulations to drive the electrification if China is serious about meeting the climate targets, especially the midterm climate targets of peaking CO2 by 2030 and the long term, the decarbonization by 2060. So in this sense, some people say here now in Europe, but China is coming down or bringing down the subsidies on electrification, on EVs. Doesn't that mean that they shift away from the promotion of electric vehicles? What would be your answer? And I just mentioned we have to be quick in this round because I also have a lot of list of questions from the auditory, and I would like to at least also take some of them and talk to you with this about it.
To answer very quickly, no. The phase down of subsidy does not mean that China is slowing down its EV targets. Instead, the country really believes the technology are mature enough and the manufacturers are strong enough to not to rely on the central subsidy anymore. However, if you look at the detail of the subsidy, it's actually shifting from the upfront subsidy to more like a usage level support, such as building more infrastructure and a lot of usage related incentives replace the upfront subsidy.
You mentioned also that the subsidies are also somehow related and developed for driving efficiency of electric vehicles in the future. Would you see that this is something other countries, California, Europe, Germany, could learn from China to also have an eye on the efficiency of electric vehicles in the future?
Right. I'm actually not familiar with any electric vehicle efficiency requirements in Europe, especially. But I think it's a good thing to do because we all know, especially in China, when we don't have a very clean grid right now, we have to consider the life cycle energy consumption, life cycle greenhouse gas emissions of the vehicles. And if you consume a lot of electricity when you drive on road, even your zero tailpipe emissions, you're still emitting from the upstream power plants. So having very efficient, longer range electric vehicles are really the key in those policy design.
And another thing is what a lot of people are talking about in Europe, at least, that they say, well, there's a huge rumor and there are huge plans to shift away from EVs and to focus mainly on fuel cell electric vehicles with hydrogen as a fuel. And if I just got the numbers today, a current snapshot is that I think in the first quarter of 2021, we saw the sales of more than 500,000 electrified vehicles, and there were 150 fuel cell vehicles in the fleet. So the current status, I would say, is premature, but from your perspective, do you see that there's a huge change in the strategy for at least passenger cars to shift from battery electric vehicle to fuel cell electric vehicle in the near future?
The short answer is no, especially no for passenger cars. But China has recently launched a pilot program for fuel cell vehicles. And this is in parallel to a major amendment to China's energy law. Now, China includes hydrogen as an energy source in the new law, so that promotes many outlets of hydrogen, many projects for the outlet of hydrogen as energy, including using fuel cell vehicles. However, the fuel cell vehicle strategy are at a very nascent early stage. In the past decade, actually, fuel cell vehicles are never taken out of the table, taken down from the table. It's actually always in the subsidy program. But only recently, China saw, oh, it wasn't very effective in promoting fuel cell vehicles. So maybe we will launch a special pilot program to promote such technology. But this promotion is very different from the promotion of battery electric vehicles 10 years ago. It is at a much smaller scale. And so far, I think not only 15 city clusters have applied to the fuel cell vehicle pilot program. Basically, if they qualify, they will receive central subsidies and other supports. But the total planned vehicle numbers, I think, is 250,000 by 2030 or something like that. I can check the number, but it's not comparable to the electric vehicle development, even in the early stage.
Thank you very much. That is a also clear answer, which I think is important, because somehow there are so many rumors about China, but sometimes I think there's not so many facts about this issue, and therefore I think it's important to bring these messages also to Europe. Another question which reached us from the auditory I would like to pose is, you mentioned that China is developing as a main supplier for EV batteries in the future. How do you see the challenge and the problem that batteries are very energy intensive in the production, and they are produced mainly on energy based on coal? So what happens if Europe just focuses on zero carbon or low carbon batteries, green batteries in the future? How would China position themselves, and is there already a sensitivity for also greening the battery supply chain in China for making the electric vehicles even greener in the future?
I think this is an excellent question. There weren't many studies focusing on the full entire life cycle of electric vehicles, including battery production cycle. But recently, there are increasing number of such studies that also demonstrating what you have said, that the production of battery itself can be polluting. So far, China has not set any clear targets of, hey, we want a low carbon pathway for the supply chain for producing EVs. However, China is going to develop this sectoral carbon peaking roadmap for transportation, and that will include the auto manufacturing or EV manufacturing stage. If you have any suggestions, we were very happy to bring those recommendations to China. And basically, we need a lot of data to support such requirement.
Thank you. That's also an important thing. And it brings me to the fact, once again, I think it's important to ask and to answer to the question, so the 14th five-year plan have been released. But does this mean that everything has been set for the regulations on transport, on road transport, and especially on EVs in the future? Or will the main regulations come in the next months and years, as you mentioned, this carbon peaking plan for transport in the near future?
Yeah, if you can recall the pyramid chart I showed earlier. So the national level 14th five-year plan is that, but the sectoral 14th five-year plan hasn't been set. And more importantly, China is now considering a number of strategies to peak the carbon emissions for different sectors. There will be, well, actually, the Ministry of Environment is taking the lead in at least coordinating these sectoral plans, and they may assign to other ministries to develop more specific plans. For example, to the Ministry of Land Use and Construction to develop one for the construction sector, and to assign the Ministry of Transport to develop one for the transportation sector. But that has not been set either. But one longer term strategy, which is the NEV development strategy, has been set by the State Council and especially by the Ministry of Industry and Information Technology. But to me, that one is not ambitious, and it doesn't include any long-term, like beyond 2025 targets, which is not sufficient for now. So to summarize, there are plenty of opportunities for us all, the community together, to play a role to influence the sectoral 14th five-year plan, as well as the sectoral carbon peaking plan for transportation.
One thing is to promote electrification. The other thing is what happens to internal combustion engine cars in China. And I think it's also important to mention you're working in this area. Maybe in the past, the ICCT worked even more in the sector of air pollution and emission standards, part of CO2 standards. And I think, what do you see will be next steps also for China to further develop the emission standards, and what could be the implication for the ratio of costs between EVs and cars with internal combustion engine?
Right. There used to be some mentioning about China is considered a ban to ICE vehicles. I think that's a misinterpretation. China would never consider a real ban of that technology. Instead, if you look at the recent leading research project by a number of auto associations and OEMs, they're looking at like 50% hybrid vehicle, hybrid passenger cars, and the other 50% electric vehicles for 2035. This was shown in my earlier figure as well. So the conventional vehicle technologies still have some room to grow, but as you said, probably they will grow at higher cost compared with EV over the time. I skipped one slide, but there was one of our recent study, cost parity for passenger cars between electric technology and various conventional fuel technology. We think in the next 5 to 10 years, all passenger cars, including big ones, SUVs, and smaller ones, should have reached their price parity. We're talking about upfront cost. So when you see electric vehicles listed with the same or cheaper price than ICEs, if we consider all the cost saving, maintenance saving, fuel saving from electric vehicles during the full useful life cycle, we already have seen many vehicle segments achieve that parity and also saving consumers money today. So this was also showing in the same study in terms of useful life costs EVs are already competitive in many application scenarios.
Thank you. There are a couple of questions more, but we are coming to the end of the time of the seminar. So I think my last question is, if you were an international car supplier or car manufacturer, would you think that for 100% sure you will be able to sell internal combustion engine cars to China beyond 2035? What would be your advice?
Well, unless you have a very, very special car, I need to think about a very niche set of consumers and niche market for my car to be successful in China. Otherwise, I probably will face a lot of even restrictions of use because I'm a high polluting tailpipe in terms of tailpipe emission and high polluting vehicle cannot be driven in central area of the city. It can be possible that China will launch a number of central and local policies that will put ICs at a disadvantage.
Thank you very much, Hui. This was just, I think, a view in the glass ball, but it shows that this is an important development, which definitely we will monitor, and it's definitely not the last webinar and web talk with you and others about climate change and climate protection agenda in transport in China. We will come up with a lot of other webinars on this issue and other formats, not only on China, but also on India, because we think that this is important for also the German developments and the developments in Europe, as well as in the US, but this is up to you, to learn what are the strategies, what are the way forwards for those huge countries in Asia driving their national determined contribution in transport for decarbonization in this sector. Because on the one hand, we see how this can contribute to global climate protection. On the other hand, we see where are the markets for tomorrow, especially for countries like Germany, which is really export-oriented in the automotive sector. Therefore, we are very happy that we will have the chance within a project of the International Climate Initiative, supported by our Ministry for Environment, to work under the coordination of GIZ, together with youth from the ICCT, from WRI, the World Resource Institute, the International Transport Forum, the Sustainable Low Carbon Transport Partnership, with a lot of experts on working jointly on decarbonization strategies in transport and higher ambition to meet the climate targets, to drive the decarbonization around mid-century. And I'm very grateful that you made it today. It is early in the morning in California. Thank you very much, Hui, for joining us. It was a great pleasure, as always, to have you. Thank all our auditory or people from the auditory very much for taking the time and joining us for this web talk. I hope that you took something away from it, you're interested in it. There were a couple of questions which were very detailed. We will try to answer this in the follow-up of this webinar. Otherwise, you can just send us an email and we forward it also to Hui, and we will try to answer it to the email address info@agora-verkehrswende.de. I think it will be pushed in the chat, in the technical chat, and my colleague Oda from the GIZ also posted a web link to the project I mentioned, the NDC Transport Initiative in Asia project. which I was mentioning. So if you're interested in this project, or if any questions or comments, please send it to us. We also forwarded it to our colleagues in our partner organizations. Having said this, once again, great thanks, great applaud to San Francisco. It was a great pleasure and honor to have you. And I wish you here in Europe, in Germany, Berlin, a very nice evening. And Hui, you have a great day. Hopefully stay healthy and confident in the future. And we will come up with our next talks and next series of talks on decarbonization of transport in Asia. Thank you very much and have a great day. Bye-bye.
Thank you for the invitation once again. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.